Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bintou, and if you're new here, make sure to subscribe as I upload new videos every Wednesday. And that's probably it for now because work is gonna start up again soon. Anywho, I am happy to have you guys here. We've reached the end of another month, so it's time to film one of my favorite videos, which is the monthly wrap-up, in this case for July. Now, July ended up being an excellent reading month for me. I actually think in this month of July 2020, I read the most number of books that I've ever read in a single month in my entire life. I read a total of 17 books entirely, and there were 2 books that I DNF'd, one which I was about halfway through and one where I was about 20% of the way through. So that was a lot of reading this month. I'm really surprised that I got that much done, but I'm super excited. I read a lot of good books. There were about 7 5-star reads, 8 4-star reads, and 2 3-star reads. I think what I'm gonna do is, normally I do these videos where I discuss the books in the order that I read them, but I'm actually going to just go in order of rating. So I'm gonna discuss all the 5-star books first, and then I'll get into my 4-star books and then the few 3-star books that I read. All right, without any further ado, let's get into the books. All right, so let's get started. The first book that I read this month was Speak No Evil, or excuse me, the first 5-star book that I read this month was Speak No Evil. And this was one of the books that I picked up because it was recommended during Pride Month. So that was last month and I didn't get around to it. So I moved it over for this month. And this book was great. Actually, I was thinking about how I had already done the mid-year freakout tag, and I had skipped a question about a book that made you cry because I hadn't read a book this year that made me cry yet. But this book did it. This book basically follows this young high school boy. He is Nigerian American, and he is coming to grips with his sexuality. So he confesses to his best friend that he's gay, and eventually his father accidentally finds out because of messages on his phone. And his parents are extremely traditional, extremely religious, so obviously they're not accepting of his sexuality. And a lot of the book is just him trying to come to terms with his sexuality. He doesn't quite accept it. And he comes across other people in his life who are helping to get him there. And about 2/3 of the way through the book, there is a shift in perspective. So we shift from this main character, the young man, to his best friend. Her name is Meredith. And that's because something happens in the book and there's a shift there. And you learn about their friendship from the girl's perspective. This book tackles more than just one main topic. I don't want to talk about the second one because it gives away a pretty important plot twist, but they're both topics that the main character as a young Black male has to deal with. And I think that the author did a really good job of getting us to understand his struggle, especially as he is trying to balance his urges and his own personal desires with not bringing like shame upon his entire family. And there's just no easy solution to the predicament that he's found himself in. I think this is classified as YA. Well, I don't normally read YA. This was an excellent book. Okay, second 5-star read this month was Party of Two by Jasmine Gilroy. So I picked this up because someone actually talked about it in my comment section. It was one of their books for the month, and I always like to throw in some sort of contemporary romance whenever I have been reading many heavy books. And so I grabbed this and it was fantastic. I loved the main character. Her name was Olivia, and the protagonists in this book are in their like mid to late 30s. And I actually don't think I've read a romance where the characters were so adult. So Olivia is a lawyer, and she just started up this law firm with one of her friends. And the guy in the book, his name was what was his name? His name is Max, and he is actually the senator of California. So they are basically navigating their relationship and dealing with a whole bunch of adult issues that come up. So for example, because of his job, he is frequently in the spotlight, and so that's something that Olivia has to come to terms with. Olivia is Black and Max is white, so that's another thing that they have to deal with. It was just a really fun read, and because of this, I actually did pick up another book by Jasmine Gilroy, and that one was a 4-star. So I'm going to talk about that one later. But this book in particular, just the main protagonist, Olivia Monroe, she was fantastic. and she just made this book super fun to read. So this book is actually number 5 in a series. I hadn't known that when I picked it up, but it doesn't seem like they are dependent on one another. It can be read as a standalone, and I have heard that her earlier books aren't as good. They seem to get better as they get later in the series because she is probably getting more experience under her belt, to be honest. So I'm kind of glad I started this way, and then I worked my way down to the next book in the series, and I definitely thought that this one was better than that one, so there's probably some truth to that. Okay, next book we have In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This book was beautiful. So this was a memoir, and it follows Carmen in her life and in her relationship with a woman while she was in grad school. This was a very psychologically abusive relationship. And not only is she detailing her life experience and sort of the suffering that she went through during her time in this relationship, she is also bringing to light the fact that abuse in same-sex marriages, or in same-sex relationships, excuse me, aren't taken as seriously, and especially when the people are both women. And so it's something that isn't reported often and is not documented. And one of the reasons that she explains for writing this book is to contribute to that record, so that other people out there know that this happens, and it's important to learn more about it, to understand it, and to not hide it, basically. I talked a little bit more about this book in the top 5 nonfiction books that I've read so far in 2020, and this definitely is on that list. It was fantastic. This also was a pretty short read. I finished it in 1 or 2 days. I can't remember, but definitely not more than 2 days. And I actually listened to the audiobook as well with this. I got it from my public library, and it is narrated by the author. All right, next book this month was The Vanishing Half, and The Vanishing Half was my birthday book this month, and it was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Just a tiny bit of backstory. I think most people already are familiar with this book, but we've got these 2 twins, and they are technically both white passing, but one chooses to actually live life as a white woman, and then the other one does not. And she marries a black man, and they both have daughters. But for the white passing twin, her daughter is white, and then for the other twin, her daughter is black. And we're kind of going through the lives of the mothers and as well as the lives of their daughters. It was just really fascinating to see how the lives that these 2 women took were so vastly different, considering the fact that they grew up in the same place, and they're identical twins, so they have the exact same DNA and all of that. And then the lives of their daughters are even more drastic because their daughters are of 2 very, very different races. I also found it really interesting to see how the life of the white passing twin turned out to be. And not just her life specifically, but also her thinking and her thought process. That did change in order to fit into the suburban life that she built for herself as a white woman. Overall, very fantastic read. Definitely deserving of all of the hype that it has received. Okay, next on my list is The Beast Side: Living and Dying While Black in America. So I actually just listened to the audiobook for this. It was on Kindle Unlimited. They had both the book and the audiobook, but it wasn't very long, and I was just listening to it while I was doing chores. Finished it in one single afternoon, and it was pretty great. So the author, D. Watkins, he talks about his youth, specifically as a teen in Baltimore, and what it's like to grow up and watching all of members of his family and his friends murdered, whether it's by gang violence or by cops. And he's actually a professor at a community college, and he focuses in on literacy for a significant portion of the book. And he strongly believes that literacy and reading are really important for alleviating the issues that he and people like him face, specifically because it helped him in his own life. He describes communication amongst black men and communication between black men and the cops as being one of the biggest issues leading to the problems that they face in their neighborhoods. And just overall, I think that it was a very interesting account from someone as a black man living in Baltimore, which is a city that I'm not super familiar with. I've only ever visited Baltimore once because a friend from college lived there. And I definitely appreciate his belief, his strong belief in how education can be used to help lift the people in his community out of the challenges that they're facing. Okay, so next on this 5-star list is Hunger by Roxane Gay. Another memoir. I've actually read a lot of memoirs because there's one more 5-star book and it is yet another memoir. So for some reason, I read a lot of memoirs this month. This one was also really short. And this book, I imagine, must not have been easy for the author to write, because we begin by learning about this extreme sexual trauma that she faced as, I think she was 12 years old. So as a very, very, very young girl, and how that trauma has basically gone on to affect her for the rest of her life in terms of her weight. So she talks about how she created this armor, basically, that was her extreme obesity to keep men away from her. And she would go through phases of gaining the weight and then losing it when she went home because her parents would try to force her to. And the moment that she started to lose weight, she would start to feel unsafe again because it would attract the attention of men. And she would go on to gain the weight back again until she felt safe in the cage that she's created for herself of her body. There are so many important things she brings up in this story. I won't be able to capture all of them. I think one of the important things was, though, the fact that what it's like to live life as someone who is extremely obese. She touches on things that I would never think about that make life for her very complicated, and the fact that she has to put more thought into everyday activities that anyone of a normal weight could just get up and go do. She also touches on the fact that even though she's talking about her life and her family, even though she is Black, she was privileged in the sense that she grew up in a middle class / upper class family, and she goes through these phases in her life where she kind of moves away and is struggling, but knows that she can always fall back on her family as well. And I'm super glad that she acknowledged that privilege, because she mentions that, you know, she's different from, I guess, the typical Black family that her classmates had expected when she showed up to her high school and her college. And she did attend some of the most prestigious schools, both for high school and college in this country. But overall, I loved this memoir. I'm super glad that I read it. And that's what I think I'm starting to enjoy about memoirs, is just reading about other people's lives and the struggles that they face, especially if they're facing struggles that I simply don't face or can't face, but there are people around me that probably do. Just gives you a little bit more empathy into the lives of those people. And then the final 5-star read of this month is another memoir, My Vanishing Country by Bakari Sellers. And so Bakari, he works on CNN. He is, I think, a correspondent is what they call them. But he was also a representative, the youngest representative for the state of, was it North Carolina?
I messed up. It was not North Carolina. It was South Carolina.
The book focuses on it's a memoir, so it focuses on his life and some of his accomplishments. And I would say that my favorite parts of the book are his discussion of his neighborhood, the fact that he is from the country, he grew up in quite extreme poverty. But then he also touches on the fact that he himself and most of his family ended up being very successful. His siblings, some of them are doctors. So he managed to work himself out of the poverty, but then he talks about the friends that he grew up with who did not end up being quite as successful, and discussing why he thinks that was, or why that things like that happen. How even though they were in the same neighborhood and this friend was brought into his household, so they were almost part of the same household, they still had very different life outcomes. He also talks about his anxiety. He deals with extreme anxiety. And that's probably not something that I would have expected from someone whose job it is to be a public figure, basically. And last thing is, he talked about his the birth of his twin daughters and how his wife almost died in the process of giving birth, which calls attention to a problem that Black women are far more likely to die in childbirth than any other woman of any other race in this country. Often due to the fact that their pain and their concerns aren't taken as seriously by the doctors that treat them. And that's just another way of how racism kind of works its way into our systems and leads to these discrepancies, these disparities in health outcomes for women of different races.
Hey guys, so I'm checking in here. I actually decided that I would split this video up. So instead of doing all 17 books in this one video, it was just way too long. I'm going to split it up. So I'm going to keep this video just my 5-star reads of July. And then I'll upload a second video where I go over my 4 and 3-star reads of the month. So definitely tune back in for those. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.